Back in the days before European gamers were allowed to even see the concept sketches of role-playing titles, Final Fantasy, a Dungeons & Dragons inspired foray into the realms of virtual storytelling, had been quite successful in Japan. It wouldn't launch in America until 1990, and never in its original form in the PAL territories. The game had single-handedly averted crisis and saved the sinking Squaresoft, so a sequel was sure to be produced, ironic of course given the final in its name. It's not all good though, because it fathered a child. This child was Final Fantasy II, dragged onto the Famicom after its dope parents left it in a ditch. It sets the tone from the start, pulling no punches. After naming your characters whatever hilarious name you feel, you're thrust into an epic battle. Armed with 120 collective HP spread across your collection of stock war orphans, and with low quality weapons you carefully choose your attack command. After much consideration over quite what to do about the 4 heavily armoured horsemen bearing down upon your position with their singular frame powers, the horsemen advance and exhale softly. Twat falls to the ground in a pool of her own blood. Lol attempts to exact revenge, but misses his mark completely and careens into a nearby pixel tree, rendering himself only able to talk in short bursts for the remainder of the game. The other 2 are culled similarly, and the screen fades to black.
Now this is where the game should end, but sadly it doesn't.
Some duff princess and a white mage have decided that they want some fun with you. Guess what passes for entertainment in Finn? Torturing orphans by making them embark on a session of Final Fantasy II, of course. This game kills you in the first 5 seconds, and spends the rest of the game repeating the process inside your own head. The game is much like the first Final Fantasy in most elements. It has an overworld, dungeons and towns where the inhabitants attempt to say funny things, and a series of vehicles. Though fans of the later episodes in the increasingly milked to near death, or even limit break as one might say, Final Fantasy series will notice that this game contains the very first Cid, who appears as the world's only airship-owning civilian and personal taxi service to the heroes. It also contains chocobos for the first time, which allow you to travel around without enemy encounters. In an attempt to one-up its gaming legacy, this title accelerated the focus on the story from the off, with an overly Star Wars-inspired imperial power threatening a smaller kingdom with a giant metal ship. You spend most of the game as rebels who ultimately want to restore their homes. There are substantial peripheral characters, and it introduces temporary characters to your party for the first time. This is the first Final Fantasy to employ proper dialogue and character backstories to a decent effect, and it's generally good, although quite cliched, in 2008. Not only that, but when you finish with the main game, you get the option to play Rebirth. This is basically the Jade Passage and Pandemonium portions of the game played in mirror mode, with a party constructed entirely of the dead characters, Minwu, Joseph, Scott, and Ricard. Sadly, this bonus lasts about 5 minutes and the story is negligible at best. Something about beating up the Light Emperor who wants to make them immortal if they forgive him? But when they won't, he tries to kick their asses anyway. It's all very throwaway. The battle system is where things get a little shaky. Essentially, what it asks is that you use abilities to skill them up. You may be thinking that Final Fantasy XI or Grand Theft Auto San Andreas work well with that. How awesome? You'd be wrong. It's broken considerably. No, actually, it's so broken that after failing to get into the party, it wandered home covered in tears, recorded a video to its few friends wherein it long-windedly described its internal monologue before blowing its brains across its parents' carpet. What all of this means is you cannot progress by simply grinding. Your characters must lose health and mana, usually under halfway in battle, in order to get a maximum increase. The easiest way to do this is to turn your characters' blades on each other. Yes, the game lets you succeed by knocking 7 shades out of each other while a bewildered enemy party stands by. In fact, weapons are about the only thing you can skill up properly by playing through and actively fighting encounters. You'd be surprised how awkward and annoying it is to actually kill yourself. Though despite this, the more determined could abuse this feature and build their statistics drastically on the easiest of foes, changing the game from frustratingly hard to boringly easy after many hours of calculated self-harm that makes attention seekers look like amateurs. It's like Pokemon training EVs, only much, much worse. It's dirty, and it makes you miss grinding. Interestingly, all of your characters can equip 2 weapons. Dual wielding increases your attack power considerably and makes things easier. While this is an enticing concept, you may come a cropper if you intend to run away from battle at any stage in the game. Running away is calculated by your evasion and agility, and with 2 weapons in hand, you barely evade anything. Unable to evade and thus skill up means that you will have to deal with every random encounter along the way, however awkward or close to the dungeon's end it is. Magic is skilled with slight variances. Magic levels based entirely on the amount of times it's cast, which is very good for things like cures which can be used outside of battle, but not for nukes, buffs and debuffs. When initially learned, all magic costs a single point of mana, which is good considering your characters have 5 base, and with each level an extra point of mana cost is added. The game in general seems obsessed with this sort of thing, with even inns charging you an absorbent amount of cash, depending on the amount of health restored by the stay. This also leaves itself open to abuse, with heavily discounted stays being made available if you use the cure spell to maximise HP beforehand. Mana doesn't seem to modify it. High tier spells also start at level 1. This means that usual big hitters like Holy and Flare will be measly by the time they're received. It'll take about 500 casts of each spell on each character that uses magic to even begin to catch up with yourself. Battles aren't the only thing that are wrong. The storyline, especially early on, has a nasty habit of making you wander around. Usually take item / temporary party member / brain to location via an unrelated location, and then go back to Finn. Once you've done that, they'll probably send you back out to visit a room just next to the one you just were with item / character / brain. Also, the 4th characters awarded to you throughout the game are mostly a waste of space, with the exception of Minwoo, who starts out much more powerful than you. They all start out basic and need to be built up just like your other characters, but due to their temporary status, can you really be arsed? It introduces a keyword system of story progression, which makes you feel like you're having more of an input than you actually are. It's quite fun if you always remember to memorise words that are bolded in a different colour, which you should. Though words and items can both be used to get different responses, you'll probably have to use both to incite the correct response to advance the story at the point you're at. This can get overly fiddly, but with all the other things considered, I'm going to call this a positive point, as it sorely needs one. This is probably the most interesting change since Final Fantasy 1. Lastly, doors. You've likely heard the expression that too many cooks spoil the broth. Well here, it's doors. There are hundreds of them. And if you play RPGs, then you know what doors usually contain. Chests and treasure. Maybe a new hat. Or a fake beard. Well, Final Fantasy 2 includes pointless doors to empty rooms. And instead of placing you at the door when you enter, like it should, it spawns you in the middle of the room. What's the point in that? Well, it puts the encounter rate on the squares before the door you must pass over to 100%, basically forcing you into battles. You soon learn to skip doors, but that's where the terrible 2 strikes again, by sometimes actually placing valuable equipment, items, storyline progression, or related knickknacks behind one of a million force encounter trapdoors. Catch that throw! If you've yet to play these old Final Fantasies, please don't use this one to enter the series. It really is the annoying little brother, one that even manages to out-annoy Tidus by a large breach. If you want to do it for historical reasons, there are seriously better alternatives around. While it's the weakest Roman numbered entry in the series, it does introduce some of the series' mainstays like Chocobos, so it can't really be ignored. It still gets invitations to the parties, but whether it shows up drunk or not is hard to predict. It's a shame really. Then again, in America some people still call Cecil's Quest Final Fantasy 2, so at least the ignorant can avoid this shady path.
Exactly whom I'm supposed to be. Don't you know which clothes even fit me? Come on.